Great. Okay, great. Okay, great.
Hello. Excellent. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. This is very exciting. I'm very excited. So, tonight, the head to the Ethical Society of St. Louis welcome New York Times bestselling author Kelly Barnhill, winner of many awards and writer of numerous fantastic books. Most relevantly, the book she's here to read and discuss, When Women Were Dragons, published just this past Tuesday. Tonight's event is possible because of your support. When you support publishing books, you support our shared local economy. It helps us keep our bookstore open, as well as our streets paved, our libraries funded, our parks free, and us living. To support the authors we love, and so many other things that make St. Louis a better place. I would like to thank you all for shopping local and supporting this event. I'm Cliff, children's specialist at Left Bank Books, and evangelist for Kelly's book, The Girl Who Drank the Moon, is a fantastic book if you have not already read it. I am so happy to be back and doing in-person events. It's fantastic. I love to see you all, even though there's one that I cannot say. We are still producing virtual events and will continue bringing our in-person events into the virtual world for those of you watching it. Be sure to check out our event calendar on our website at @night.com for a list of all of our programming for readers of all ages. And now, about tonight's book. When Women Were Dragons is a timely and timely speculative novel in which award-winning author Kelly Barnhill boldly explores rage, memory, and the tyranny of forced limitations. When Women Were Dragons exposes the world that wants to keep women small, their lives and their prospects, and examines what happens when they rise en masse and take up the space they deserve. On behalf of the Left Books and the Ethical Society of St. Louis, we all please help me warmly welcoming our guest for the evening, Kelly Barnhill.
Hi, everyone. Oh, it's on. Can you hear me?
Oh.
Okay, great. Great. Are we sure it's on? Okay. Is it coming through the thing? Or is it just, am I just loud?
I'll get Adam.
It is true to have a teacher voice, so here we go. We'll stop.
Oh, there we go. Oh.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly Barnhill, and we're going to have a really good conversation today. I'm super excited about it. This is my book, When Women Were Dragons. I thought that I would read a little bit to start out with. Great. So I was trying to decide what to read, and I think I'm just going to do the very first letter that appears in the book. So the way that this book is structured is that it's written as though it's a memoir, and I contend it is a memoir, albeit of a character who does not exist. Well, that doesn't really exist, but maybe it does, maybe she does, I don't know what to say. But I wanted to also intersperse it with these little interstitial bits, the writings and the research and the collection of the scientist named Dr. Henry Gantz. And you sort of get a sense of his journey and his plot arc and his character arc through these little glimpses into his work. So we start out with a letter that he has collected in his vast research of this phenomenon of dragging. Okay. Greetings, Mother. I do not have much time. This change, this wondrous, wondrous change is at this very moment upon me. I could not stop it if I tried, and I have no interest in trying. It is not from any place of sorrow that I write these words. There is no room for sorrow in a heart full of fire. You will tell people that you did not raise me to be an angry woman, and that statement will be correct. I was never allowed to be angry, was I? My ability to discover and understand the power of my own raging was a thing denied to me until at last I learned to stop denying myself. You told me on my wedding day that I was marrying a hard man whom I should have the pleasure to sweeten. It is a good woman, you said, who brings out the goodness in a man. That lie became evident on our very first night together. My husband was not a good man, and nothing would have ever made him so. I married a man who was petulant, volatile, weak-willed, and morally vile. You knew this, and yet you whispered matronly secrets into my ear and told me the pain would be worth the babies I would bring you one day. There were no babies, were there? My husband's being sought to that, and now I shall see to him tooth and claw. The downtrodden becomes the bearer of a heavenly, righteous flame. It burns me even now. I find myself unbound by earth, unbound by man, unbound by wifely duty and womanly pain. I regret nothing. I shall not miss you, mother. Perhaps I won't even remember you. Does a flower remember its life as a seed? Does a phoenix recall itself as it burns anew? You will not see me again. I shall be but a shadow streaking across the sky, fleeting, speeding, and utterly gone. Oh, great, fantastic. Let's test. Does that work? Nope.
It's coming out.
Oh, it is? You hear me? Great, then I won't worry about it. Fantastic.
That's a wonderful place for us to start, frankly. I am particularly, let me say, my name is Danielle King. I'm one of the assistant managers at Left Bank, and our news book buyer. It is a joy to be here. It is not a problem. It is a joy to be here talking with you. I'm too huge fan of your work, hit by the communities. And this book is also wonderful. I really do want to start with something that connects to what you just read. So there is a very strong theme of the danger of silence here.
Yeah.
We could even call it kind of cardinal social sin. And silence seems to only function to like make you into something smaller, right?
Yeah.
Make you into something less, and the only reason to do that is control. But I'm also really strongly reminded as you read this, and as I was reading the book, I kept thinking about the Audre quote that your silence will not protect you. And there's a wonderful moment in the book, and I was spoiled for anybody who knows, where the main character is speaking to someone who asks her, who benefits my dear? You force yourself not to feel angry. Clearly not you. And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the price of silence and the way you see it sort of playing out in this book, and maybe even a little in the world we live in.
That's a really good question. I mean, silence has a lot of different manifestations, and we both inhabit it and allow ourselves to be inhabited by it in different ways, right? And so, I mean, spoiler alert, this book is dedicated to Christine Blasey Ford. I don't know if you guys knew this. It was a weird thing. It was a weird thing having my book come out on the very day that America woke up and realized that the future that she was trying to prevent was dawning on us all. That was a weird day in the life of Kelly Barnhill. And one of the things that really struck me in her testimony, and it's one of the reasons why I say in the dedication that this book has nothing to do with her, it has nothing to do with her story at all, but her testimony did trigger this narrative. This book would not have existed if I didn't sit there and on a rainy afternoon in Minneapolis in my minivan, feeling like I was turning into a supernova. But But one of the things that was, I think, really illuminating to me was the toxic nature of silence. That this terrible thing happened, this terrible thing that she didn't have language to be able to say. And that it remained that way, right? And I think that silence can operate in that same way for, with trauma generally, but also with removing context by which we can have a conversation about things. That's the other weird thing about this book coming out right now, because I wouldn't have guessed in a million years when I was writing this book that we would be facing a reality in which books were being banned, and books were being banned because of particular context, right? And why would we want to have silence on those subjects? Are we uncomfortable about discussing race in America? Yes. Are we uncomfortable about talking about sexuality in America? Yes. Are we uncomfortable about talking about liberation in America? Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there are different kinds of silences. There are the silences that grow in response to trauma. And I think that there's all kinds of psychological reasons for that. And that is a response that can be both protective as well as harmful, right? But then there are also silences that family groups and community groups and city groups and nation groups can impose in order to ensure that that trauma continues, right? And we've seen that. And then there are silences that get imposed because people get uncomfortable about the culture changing. And that's a whole other silence altogether.
Can I pause before you? I think that it's going to be easiest for the virtual audience there's a lot of echoing going on. If we go without microphones, is that okay for everyone in?
Can you hear me?
Do you want to move forward
Right.
so you can hear a little bit better?
Excellent.
I am really loud.
We can also project more without the microphones since they won't be yelling into the microphones, but there was an issue. So if you want to move forward so you can hear maybe better, or
Wonderful.
we can.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
That's
Great.
That's really wonderful because I hear you talking about silence as like an internally imposed thing for protection and an externally imposed thing.
Yeah.
And the external one, we can say, this is the same kind of thing. This is to protect you from all of this change. But another sort of theme in here is that change is not inescapable.
Right.
Part of nature, certainly not part of our nature. So there's something really, I appreciate you connecting these two, because there's all these kinds of silences, right? Like we talk about women's reproductive health, and we have a lot of silence around these things as well. We do. And individual forgetting and collective forgetting kind of do serve different functions.
Yeah.
So it's really, I appreciate it.
There's another aspect to it too, and that also has to do with collective trauma. One of the things, so this is another thing that when I was approaching writing this book, I was thinking a lot about a different pandemic before we went into a pandemic, which was when the pandemic happened. I was like, wow, this is weird because it's what I've been thinking about for a long time. It was kind of a creepy feeling. And so my great-grandfather died in the Spanish flu. The illness went through the family. So he got it, my great-grandma got it. My great-grandma was pregnant with my grandma at the time. And my Aunt Ruth got it. She was a little girl at the time. My great Aunt Ruth was incredibly sick and nearly died. My great-grandmother, her pregnancy was actually likely protective. The Spanish flu was a weird illness in that people with extremely strong immune systems were at particular risk. So the city of Boston lost like some incredibly high number of its working men. It was like a really high percentage. And they would basically, it would trigger a cytokine storm. They would basically drown in their lungs. It was awful. And whereas my great grandmother, because she was pregnant with my grandmother, it decreases your immune system, and so that pregnancy was likely protected. So fascinating. But what's weird about it is that there was, even at the time, there was all kinds of silence around that disaster. Right? We're talking about like tens of millions of people around the world who perished in this terrible, terrible illness. It went around the world, and my father did not know that his grandpa had died in the Spanish flu until he was in his 30s. His grandma lived in the house, and yet it just never came up. And that's so weird to me. And then I started kind of, puzzling through that. And I was just like, what are the great Spanish flu, pandemic flu novels? There aren't any. Where is the great pandemic flu art? Where are the great plays, right? There aren't any. Isn't that weird? There are 2 memorials to the pandemic flu dead in the entire world. Again, tens of millions of people died. One is in Kansas, and the other is in Indonesia, and that's it. Isn't that weird?
That is wild.
It's weird.
That is wild. That is wild.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, while we are on the subject of forgetting, there's a constant refrain in the book. There's a freedom in forgetting,
Yeah.
or at least something that feels like freedom.
Yeah.
It is, and they follow up to that, which is fantastic. Their freedom from being burdened by unpleasant information.
Yeah.
And I do see that. It is once again wild that your book came out. It's on its release day.
Yeah.
And in the climate that we are in, and we are, to that same effect, when do we speak of all of the people dead of COVID?
Right?
And it is almost as though it's not happening.
I know. I was on a plane, one of the planes coming over here. I was the only person wearing a mask on my whole flight. And it is, and it is interesting to me, right? That because human beings can become acclimatized to all kinds of extraordinary and unacceptable things, and this is part of our survival mechanisms, right? Because most of human history, I don't know if you knew, really sucked. For all kinds of people going real way back, right? And so it comes from a real place, right? And part of that too has to do with just our brains are wired for narrative, and our ability to tell stories and think of stories and to process information in stories is actually older than our ability to make language, which is very true. It's this actually makes me, it blows my mind every time. We've been singing and making music for longer than we have had language. We have been making art on walls and wherever else before we had language. We were dancing before we had language, but eventually, and why we have language is actually remains a mystery. But we do know that it sort of came across the human animal in a really big way, and kind of all at once. And so there's this whole theory. There's the stoned ape theory that maybe that a bunch of people got exposed to hallucinogenic mushrooms and basically created this synesthetic experience, because language basically is synesthesia. So that's fascinating to me. But it's but we have to tell stories. We think and remember and plan for the future and worry and teach and learn all through narrative, right? And so we can tell ourselves all kinds of stories to justify stuff, right? And to make sense of stuff, but also to like write things out of the story, right?
Yes.
We've been
So
writing
good
people out of the
author
story
knows
for a
how to
long time.
leave things on the cutting
Right? Oh, we do it all the time, right? You know, it's like, you know, the Disney song, we don't talk about Bruno.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
We've been not talking about Bruno forever.
There's always been.
Oh.
Perfect. So I am very curious about the setting of this book, set in the,
Yes.
it is in our world, but not.
Right.
But it is.
Right. Right.
And so you could just as easily set it today. We still
Yeah.
we're
Right.
deeply, we
Right.
just love the collective forgetting.
Right.
Why specifically
That's a really good question, and I don't really know. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I mean, the thing about writing stories is that that there is this sort of like, well, I mean, this like this is what it is, and I'm just going to follow where this leads, you know.
Yeah.
And I think I think that there's all kinds of real reasons for that. I'm working on a theory right now about where books come from, because we think of a book as being a literary, that it's bound by words on the page, and it's not, right? A book, like reading a book for the reader, is actually an experience. The sentences on the page trigger a sense memory, and so it's actually collaboration between the words on the page and the reader. But there's also this collaborative effect that happens in the writing of a book, right? Again, like pinning it into language is just like this sort of like temporary exercise, right? It's like a placeholder so that you can have the things that are going to trigger things for your reader. I say this all the time. It's not the writer who builds a story; it's the reader who builds the story, right? And so, but it is my view that what actually triggers everything is this conversation between the front brain and the back brain. So you get the front brain, that's where all of our language lives, right? It's also where our logic lives, and those sticky thoughts that we can get rid of, those thoughts that are sort of like grooves in the record player, and all of those things that we can't let go of. That's all in the front brain. Our back brain communicates in sense memory. It communicates in image, communicates in the language of metaphor. It doesn't have language though, right? And so what ends up happening is that we will get these I have this little quote on my office door that says, agitation births creation. It's like the sand in a oyster, that just I think that most novels start from us being just really annoyed about something, and like you just can't let it go, and it just sort of sticks, and you're just like worrying at that thought a lot, and the back brain is contributing. Right? And it's contributing and so a lot of times we will not realize that the book that we're writing has everything to do with this sticky thought here. But it's just like, oh no, I had this idea, and it's this and this and this, and then you're like 300 pages in, and it's like, oh, it's that.
That's what I was going through.
That's what I'm writing about. That was absolutely the case with Girl Drink the Moon. I had no idea. Like it took me a long time. Oh, I've been doing this whole time. I didn't realize it, right? And again, because because my back brain was like, no, like here's like a whole bunch of like wild things, and it's all about this, but I can't say that, right? So, but I do think in terms of this book and setting it in the 1950s, I do think that there's this sort of like recurring phrase when we talk about reproductive rights and reproductive freedom, and just like having access to healthcare. There is this phrase that gets bandied about a lot. They're trying to take us back to the 50s, right? It's a thing that people say a lot. And so when I turned into a supernova, I had actually been asked to contribute a short story for a dragon anthology. And I thought that I was done writing forever. And I was just like, okay, I'll do this one last thing because Jonathan Strand is the editor. He's so nice. You can't say like it. Just like, one thing for you. And then I was just like, sure. And then months went by. And the thing about deadlines is that they don't get farther away. Right? They get closer. It's rude. And so at the time, I just was like, oh, I should probably think of an idea pretty soon. I didn't. And then finally, Supernova. And then I was like, I'm going to go home. And I'm going to write a story about a bunch of 1950s housewives who turn into dragons and eat their husbands. And this, I literally called it Rage Story. And it was originally supposed to be a short story. And then a week and a half later, I had 120 pages. And I was like, or maybe it's something. So.
That's wonderful. Well, keeping ourselves sort of grounded in the book.
Okay, great.
A thing I'm very interested in, because I know you were a children's author, as I said. You got Girl with Drink the Moon, bought a couple copies of it. Something I'm very struck by is the way that we sit in a child's perspective for such a good deal of the book.
Yeah.
And it's even there's a constant, to mention this, a constant refrain of the sort of heads of the 2D dragons are always kind of tilted towards the sky, but the main character spends a lot of time, because she is a really good girl, with her eyes on the ground, and the world kept his eyes on the ground. It's a line that resonated with me for a really long time.
Yeah.
And so I sort of wonder, in asking about some of your choices, why you think you spent so much time with Alex as a pretty young kid?
That's a really good question, because she actually did come later. Originally, most of the story was sort of told in these documents, because the way in which the story formed was just so different from my other books. Just the process was completely different. Most of my books I write longhand. Most of the books I write, I think about for a really long time. I have a box where all of my thoughts live, and most of the time, it's a very sort of tactile process. Whereas this, I composed on the computer, and it was basically 3 big chunks that happened in different sections. And then I had to print it all out, pencil around, cut and stuff. So yeah, very much so, actually. There was one point that I was working late, my husband opens the door and sees all his papers everywhere, and I'm holding a scissors like a crazy person, and he's like, "Are you okay, honey?" And I was like, "Yes, go back to bed." So I really feel for the spouses of writers. Most of them did not sign up for it.
First, they did not know what that was, and they were signing up for it.
No. They came in with love glasses. Really, everybody does. All of us, oh man. Somebody had spelled this out for me. I might have made a different choice.
There's something so powerful about because you were spending time with her as a kid, you were getting to see these really earth-shattering events, these cataclysmic things sort of ripping the fabric of what people think is right and good out of the ground, feeling the molten heat come off of some of these bodies, right? And it is described in such a way, I felt very present in a lot of this story for that. I can't help but feel like it was connected to the fact that I was empathizing with this young girl. Even the story about her early menstruation, which is not a spoiler, it's a story about a young...
Everybody does it.
It's very common. Everybody, it's very common. You can survive it. It's fine. But even in that, and there was a really beautiful story about how all of these girls are even if I don't like you, I will give you there's something really wonderful about that. But I felt it so very viscerally because she's so young and has to take on so much.
true story. My mom in the 50s was 10, and her mother came into her bedroom, or maybe she was 11. I can't remember. My grandma was a very stately woman, and she comes into my mother's bedroom with this box of like, old school maxi pads, with like the belts and stuff. And she hands my mother this box and she says, "Here, you'll need these someday." And then she left the room. And that was it. That's all she got.
You want slightly more instruction than that.
I know. And so, silence, man.
Yeah.
It makes people behave in really weird ways. Right?
Yes.
Boy. But I do think that, part of the utility of having this, because even though much of it is told from her perspective as a child, it's definitely not a children's book. It's definitely told from, the perspective of age, looking back. But one of the useful things of doing that is that it allowed me to sort of inhabit that phenomenon of like, everybody's just like trying to get through the day. And there can be all kinds of big stuff happening. But like that's sort of like clinging to normalcy. Even for her, as extremely not normal things are happening to her that are not magical at all. It's just that her dad sucks, right? But also, just like she is losing sort of like, she keeps on like losing all of these like mainstays that are keeping her tethered. And so the only thing that she cares about is her education. Like that's like the one thing that she knows that like will lead her towards, again, a life that is bigger than the one that she's been promised, right? And because of that, it allowed me to like tell of these sort of like extraordinary things at a distance, but also allowed me to talk about these extraordinary things in a very matter-of-fact way. And then it becomes like the mundane things that are like happening to this young person that should not be happening to this young person. I was able to like use much more fantastical language about that, that's kind of a fun place to be, as a reader.
Okay, so I was instructed to ask.
Okay, fantastic. This is my favorite kind of question.
I do love, we work in a bookstore.
Right.
We do love to talk about books, and we do, like you said earlier, the book is yours until it's mine.
Right.
And then we will read in it whatever significance
Of course.
we'll put it on.
And that is all right and proper.
Is there any significance to the number of this very specific number?
You're only the second person to ask me that. And the answer is no.
Where did Shane go?
Right. But no, I have been asked if it was biblical, right? I've been asked all kinds of stuff. And no, it was just like, it was just like a large number, and it really could be any number, right? But that was like the very specific number that I had landed on, and I was like, it's what I'm not changing.
These are the numbers I matched on the numbers. This is what we're
Let
doing.
them read symbolism.
So what's funny though is that there is a lot in the book that, I did research the heck out of this book, right? And so there is like all kinds of stuff that that does correspond with very specific things, right? For example, the Timaeus of Timorium piece. So the books of Historia that I reference are the books that are missing, that are still missing. We don't know what they are. I was like, well, I don't know what they are. The stuff about Celtic knotwork The magical lore of not work is that's all a real thing, that there would be not specific to particular clans, that when young women would get married, they would combine the knot from her clan with the knot from his clan and like make a new way of making a sweater, basically, or anything else that she was going to incorporate knot work into. She would make new knots for each of her children and would wear them, like all of those, and then knots that would like do specific things. All of that is accurate. Also, the date in which the Vikings raided Rathlin and burned it down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about the fantastic. So yeah, there's a lot of power that you have at the helm of creating a world, and it seems like it'd be a huge responsibility, especially knowing that people will pick it up and kind of take it wherever they need to. It is truly a lovely experience to read this book, even as it is also a little. I was saying in the sort of green room ahead of time, I was like, I know you did not just write this book, but I'm reading it, and it feels like you just wrote this book like 10 minutes ago. And it's very surreal.
I know. It's weird for me too.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
It's weird for me too. And it is, I mean, the thing too that I think is important is that, when I sat down to write this book, I thought I was writing a story about rage. And I called it Rage Story, and it was just going to be about rage because holy crap was I mad. And the thing is that the thing about rage is that it exists to transform, right? It exists to burn things away and leave that which is essential behind, right? And sometimes it doesn't, and that's why we go to therapy. Or or Republicans. But yeah, when people get stuck in rage, that's when things get a little wonky and bad for them, right? And it's bad for our bodies, it's bad for the world, it's bad for us. But experiencing rage as it is meant to be experienced is a very clarifying experience, right? And that was actually like a surprise to me to see the relationship between rage and memory, and to see the relationship between rage and understanding, you know, and also to see the relationship between rage and figuring out like what the path forward is. But the thing is that like as people who were raised female identified in America and just like generally in the culture, like this idea that rage is that, you know, it's unladylike, because nobody likes an angry woman. My mother told me. I've forgiven her, but that is like a phrase that I hadn't been told.
It's a thing to be contained.
Yeah, and which means that sort of like that clarity gets denied to a very large portion of it until they can't take it anymore.
Yes.
And so a thing that we spoke of earlier while we're on this is Alex and Bee's mother.
Yes.
As in Alex's life, she's a stifling force.
Yes.
She's trying to keep her in bounds.
Right.
But having the mothers that we do, we know that it is an act of love.
Yeah.
It is that you want your child to survive. You want your child to survive in this world. And the only way that some people can see to do that is to beat them into the mold.
Don't go outside of these lines. Yeah.
Press you into a shape that is safe.
Yeah. But also, I can't bear the thought of losing you. I can't bear the thought of losing you.
It's protecting.
Yeah.
It's a form
Yeah. This is the shape of the world that I understand, and so I can't have you not in there because I can't follow you there. But the thing is, so this is a theme for me in my work generally, is, you know, parents who love their children, who want to do right by their children, who think they're doing the right thing, and who fail their children nonetheless, which is basically the story of every parent.
That is parent.
Every parent ever. And me too, right? And me too. Like the ways in which I have failed my children are infinite, right? And one of the things that I think that and it's one of the things that is kind of driving me crazy right now with all of the discourse about sort of the curriculum wars and the book banning and everything else, is that it's all framed in this in this language of parents' rights. There's nothing that makes me itchier than parents' rights, because that's not the rights that we have to care about. We have to care about the right of the child to an education, the right of the child to learn, the right of the child to become themselves, to self-determine, right? And self-determination is scary for some parents, right? And the thing is that, like, what we have to learn at some point is that our children, just like my books don't belong to me, they belong to the reader. Our children do not belong to us. They never did. They never did. They belong to themselves, and they belong to the world, and we're just here to keep them safe and to make sure they're fed and make sure they're educated and make sure there's a roof over their head and make sure that they know right from wrong and all of those things. Those are our jobs, but those kids do not belong to us. And we get ourselves into trouble when we think that we do, right? And then we do stupid things like say that masks are child abuse. What are dumb things? And guess what? Like, I've done dumb things too. So, like, who am I to judge, right? And I've made really colossal errors along the way. But again, like Bertha in this book, from a place of love and from a place of protection and from a place of, like, I just lost my family, and I can't lose the rest of my family. This is the life I chose, and it kind of sucks, but I don't know what else there is,
Absolutely. I do want to leave room for the audience to ask questions if there are any audience questions.
Yes.
So in your book, by the end, you talk about becoming a dragon is kind of a choice.
Yeah.
So you personally, would you choose to be a dragon, or would you choose to stay human?
That's a great question. Gosh, nobody's asked me that yet. I'll tell you what, I had a lot of fun writing those dragons. Dragons carrying purses, dragons knitting, dragons peeking in and to tell the nurses what to do in the nursery. All kinds of stuff was fun for me. Dragons taking an English class. That was fun for me. That being said, I think I would have done, why? Hands. It's just that freaks me out. But they do learn to knit, so maybe it would be fine. I would just have to I think that I would be a hesitator, right? And I think I would be a hesitator. But who knows? I don't know. Great question.
Do you have any other questions from the audience?
Anybody else want to know something about this book, other books, philosophies, whatever,
Philosophy of
politics,
dragon.
Not work yet.
So I've heard you say that a book is never finished, so
Yeah.
it has to be by the way.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
imagine
The phrase I've used is my cold dead hands.
Yes. I don't want to be too directly descriptive about it, but yeah.
Yeah.
I have heard you say that.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, so that would imply that you have a vision of what you're going toward.
Oh, no.
Is that not? I'm wondering you let it be taken away.
Yeah.
I'm also wondering, in situations that the rage is coming out of are ongoing and developing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the situations get worse.
Yeah.
So I'm also wondering how that plays into the process of finishing or shaping.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I mean, for me, I don't think that there's ever really a finish line for me in terms of what I'm like going toward. Because, for me, the process is so much a process of becoming, right? And there's just all these new places to uncover and all these new places to think. But then also it's trying to like make things land just that a little bit better, you know. My revision process is entirely out loud, and I just read it over again and again and again. The shape of the sentence is something I think about a lot. The texture of the language is something I think about. How it feels to speak, how it feels in the ear, how it resonates in the chest. All of those things are really important to me. I was a delayed reader as a kid, and I came to reading way after my peers. But I always loved the experience of listening to a story was like, and so for me as a writer, that's always what I gravitate to, was the experience of it out loud. And so, I mean, there's more to do. Also, my theory of revision comes from this. I used to be a park ranger. I was a park ranger and wildland firefighter, and I had this boss named Vic Stansky-Lescu, who was this grizzled ranger and rolled his own cigarettes and talked like this. And he had this theory about trail management, trail maintenance. And his theory of trail maintenance is my theory of revision. And it goes like this. This is what you gotta do. You gotta take the worst stretch of trail and you turn it into the best. Right? It's solid advice. And, right? And because the thing is that all of the wobbliest places are these opportunities, right? There's a reason why it's wobbly. And so when you can go back into those places and allow them to become what they need to become, and you pull it apart and you pull things out and you move things around, and it is such an awesome experience that I just don't want that part to end.
So parenting a child.
Also, parenting a child. Oh my heavens! All my children.
All your
children. So much.
We don't have any questions from the virtual audience yet, but someone does say hello from Salinas, California.
Oh, hello.
A couple of people in here chatting. And yeah, so if you are watching virtually and have any questions, be sure to type those up now.
All right, I have one.
Okay, go ahead.
Unless we have some more from the audience, I'd like to practice.
Oh, we have more.
Fantastic. These notes will wait, I'll ask her later.
So you said something about giving up writing forever before you did it. So have you given up writing it again, or are you working on something new?
Great question. So I did give up writing forever after Girl Who Drank the Moon came out. And if my husband was here, he'd say, yeah, she'd said that before. But I really did. The Girl Who Drank the Moon, that was a crazy experience for me. I turned that book in with a note of apology to my editor. I said, I'm really sorry. I really love this book and it means a lot to me, but I don't think anybody else is going to get it. I think that reviewers are going to hate it. I think that librarians won't like it, and I think it's not going to sell very well. That's what I said. And then I wrote, I'll do better next time. But shortly after the ARCs came out, and I got my ARCs, actually the day that the ARCs arrived in my house, we had a really major health crisis happening in my family. And the thing about whenever you have like a big like health event that sort of requires hospital visits and lots of doctors and like going back and forth, it disrupts the whole animal of the family, you know, and then my whole world was taking care of my family. And so I mean, my publisher was amazing. They were so amazing. But I wrote to them, I was just like, look, like I can do 5 events for this book, and that's it. But I don't want you to show me any reviews. I know I am not going to be able to participate in any like online conversations. I can't even think about that part of my life at all. This is my whole world right now, just this. And they were like, that's great. But the thing with the Newbery is that most of the people have some kind of inkling that their book is being discussed in this way, right? They know things, and so that they know to be up at 5 in the morning, which I did not know. It came as such like a shock to me. And it turns out that, imposter syndrome is real. And it turns out that the inferiority complex that you had your entire childhood doesn't actually go away. All of that is true. But also it meant that I was visible in a way that I never had been before. And that was a lot. It was a lot, actually. And so I started to really question the utility of my own voice. There were other books that I thought should have won that year, and I just thought, maybe if I don't write again, it's okay. Actually, it is. I'll still be me. My family will still be my family. The world will still be the world. If I don't write again, it's okay. And in some ways, I think that is that's kind of a healthy place to be in between books. I think that there is this sort of unnatural pressure on people to churn out a book a year, and I think that's hard on people. I have 2 books coming out this year, and I'll never do this again ever in my whole life. So I didn't think that I was not going to write again. But then this sort of all came out in a big chunk, and then I started doing just a creativity practice because I was really bummed out by a certain administration that I shan't name, and just the meanness and the cruelty. But it wasn't even just that. It wasn't even those people. It was just generally that the more sort of divisive and dismissive and deriding that people could be, then the more likely they would be interviewed on news programs, or they would be more likely to get checks to their campaign coffers, and that sucks, right? That just sucks. So I started writing fairy tales, not for anybody else, just for me. And I would just write them each morning, read them out loud to my dog, and then throw them away, recycle them. I've done this actually at different points at different times in my life. It was kind of just the transitoriness was important. And like chalk drawings, right? That that the rain will take away. And then I had one of those stories that I was like, this is sticky. And then that turned into Who Drank the Moon. So I kind of worked on both of them sort of in pieces, at different times, but overlapping. So which is why they're coming out together. But all that being said, I do have another book that is coming out in February. It's a novella called The Crane Husband. And it is the darkest, weirdest thing I've ever written in my whole life. So, sort of generational trauma meets farming meets transformation.
Sure. Excited.
Yeah.
So bizarrely, I had the same question.
Oh.
Which I just think is beautiful.
That is wonderful.
That is so funny.
We can end with a question from Christy,
Okay.
who says, enjoying this so much. What books did you read as a child?
Oh, that's a great question. So, before I became a reader and my parents would read to me, they sort of read all of the usual suspects, right? Grimm's fairy tales, C.S. Lewis, Tolkien. Then later on, my dad sort of graduated us to Dickens and Robert Louis Stevenson. I loved it so much. I was the oldest of a big family, and so my task on Saturdays was to take the wagon over to the library and to give my mom a break. And so I learned about books on records and like radio plays, and I had this Fisher Price record player, this plastic molded cream and orange. I bought it with my own money at a garage sale. I loved it so much. And I would, we shared rooms, and so I would go to the closet because that's what I could do by myself. I think I listened to Treasure Island like 100 times. But once I became a reader, I was always a fairy tale kid. I read fairy tale collections from all kinds of cultures, from all around the world, and I love just the practice of folktale and folktelling, and but also just that old kind of storytelling is very much sort of like, you know, the rug spread out by the fire and everybody can come. Right? It's very sort of like elemental, wide open storytelling. And so kids are there, old people are there, and people after a long day of work, they're all listening to the same story. They're all bringing their own experience to bear. I love that. But the other thing I loved was L. Frank Baum and the Oz books, which, I mean, if you were a weird kid, and I was, those books are so weird. And so delightful and just so like unsettling, and oh my god, I love them so much. And so a lot of them most of them were out of print. So there's 17 of those books. I know, and a bunch of them, a handful, are now back in print thanks to the New York Review of Books with the original illustrations. They're so good. But it is how I learned about this magical thing called interlibrary loan, which I learned about when I was 8.
And does make an appearance in the play.
Yes, it does. Nice catch.
There's a real love for libraries, and it is felt by every bookseller in library.
Oh my gosh! I mean, so yeah, both of these books that are coming out are love letters to libraries, and boy, oh boy, do they! I mean, anybody who attacks a library and who disparages the library, I mean, it's like profoundly unpatriotic, right? Because the idea of the public library, that's ours, right? That was invented here. Nobody else had thought of that before. Like, so what? I won't swear, but I'll think some swears. I was just reading the most depressing article today in the LA Times that it's a town in California that is attempting to close its library and turn it into a police station. And it's just like, are you kidding?
Cannot hear at home. That is a collective groan from the audience.
Yes. So it's beyond foolish, but it's also just this devastation, right? It is a devastation to lose a library.
Yeah, it's the undoing of these really wonderful knots of memory that wonderful authors such as you have taken the time to give us these like wonderful narratives, and even the nonfiction section, which is also fine.
It's fine.
But yeah, it's great. I love nonfiction. It's great, but it's taking away these wonderful things that give us context and scope for the world we live in, and it is unconscionable.
Yeah, and community.
Yes.
And community.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think tying us together.
Yeah, because books tie us together.
Yeah.
But also places tie us together, and spaces do, and being present with one another. So that was the hardest part about the pandemic.
Yeah. Not being able to be in community physically with people.
Yeah. So anyway, any last questions?
All right, let's give another giant round of applause for Kelly Campbell.